YouTube woodworkers love making plane restoration videos. I've made like a dozen of them. I even have a course. And we always tell people, listen, these are the steps. Follow these steps and you're gonna get a good result. And a lot of the time it works. And sometimes it doesn't. Just last week, my viewer William emailed me and said, listen, I did exactly what you told me to do. I bought a vintage hand plane, I watched all the videos, I did everything that I was supposed to do, and in the end, the plane still doesn't work. It won't take shavings. I just get little, like, wispy garbage out of it. What do I do now? And I said to him the only thing I could say. Box it up and send it to me. You know what's weird? As I'm opening this, I'm like a little bit nervous, which is strange because if I know how to do one thing in this world, it's fix a hand plane. I have nothing to be nervous about. I have a weird job. All right, William, let's see what we did here. Okay, so real quick, here's a tip. A little more packaging. This isn't quite enough. The tool can move around like this, and I'm not saying this to pick on William, but I see poorly packed tools all the time. The tool should be immobilized in there. It's made of cast iron, it can break. Oh, fantastic. I got a note that says, thank you, Rex, on top. Rex, thank you for doing this. I hope it makes an interesting video. Will. And then it's got his return address, and then it says, don't show on camera, which makes sense because he doesn't want people to know his address. Don't worry, we'll make sure we blur that out. So now, let's have a look. I can tell it's a number 4. It is. Okay. Absolutely. Stanley number 4 with, okay, some unexpected things going on with the handles there. The front knob, I'm going to say user-made on this one. Maybe William took a poke at this himself, I'm not sure. That's going to need a little attention, I think. It's a little loose, not uncomfortable, actually. And then the rear tote is, I'm going to say it's a file handle, or the handle from a turning chisel, maybe. Again, surprisingly not uncomfortable, so not bad. Body was clearly quite rusty. It's had a lot of rust removal, and it's pretty obvious from looking at this here, this bottom hasn't been flattened. There's a fair bit of pitting, and the rust was scaly, and it's definitely been de-rusted effectively, but I can just tell this hasn't been lapped flat. So that actually might be part of the problem. So let's zoom in on this and take a look at some of the details, get the blade actually out of the plane. The things we've looked at so far probably don't explain why the plane isn't cutting. The sole might have something to do with it, but we need to get inside. So take off the lever cap, that's just fine. And then let's, okay, yeah, we got some problems here. So the lateral appears to not be attached here. Okay, the rivet, probably fix that, probably peen that back over. No big deal. Also, the iron and the chip breaker, there's no screw connecting them. And that's not as weird as it seems. Early planes with chip breakers didn't connect them to the iron, and Japanese planes don't. So I've never seen a Stanley plane where the iron and the chip breaker weren't connected and it still worked. I think that screw is probably important. So we're going to have to dig around the parts bin and make sure we can connect these two together. And then, okay, the blade it's got a bit of a bend to it. I don't know how visible that is on camera, but it's straight here and then it bends. This is a replacement iron, which I think is great when you have an older tool like this. Throwing in some replacement parts is a really good idea. I do see some issues with the bevel. It's a bit rough. It looks like it was done on a kind of a coarse stone. And the edge is, sort of sharp-ish. It's definitely sharper than some I see. It's got some camber to it, which I love to see. So Will's obviously seen some videos. There's some flattening that's been done here. There's a good shine to the back of the blade. So I see he did a lot of work here, and some of it looks decent. It might need a little refining, but I think we can work with that. The chip breaker is in excellent condition, and I see some signs that it's been fitted, but the edge of it looks a bit blunt. So I think we're going to need to work on that chip breaker a little bit, and definitely this lateral lever. So this is why the parts bin was invented. And I think we'll start by working on the handles. Start with the knob, and I think somebody used an off-the-shelf screw here. Yeah, this just came. Woo! Oh, nope, this is a good one. Okay. So this is the original threaded stem that would have come on the plane. That's great, because when you try to use hardware store screws, people do that sometimes, and Stanley had their own thread pitches, so you can't use off-the-shelf screws with them. So this is good. This must have been original to the tool. Let's see if we can save that. And we probably can't, because the original knob was pretty high, and the replacement knob I have here is a bit lower. This one is off of a Canadian Stanley, and they're decent planes. I only have one, and it looks like this is going to be a pretty good fit. Nice, very solid. Let's see what's going on with the tote here. Okay, again, we have the original stem, and that's really good. And this is, yeah, it's a file handle or something. And here's the other handle. This Canadian Stanley had a broken body. I picked it up for $1 because I thought I could use it for parts, and I'm glad I did. Oh, and that seems like a surprisingly good fit. Yeah, not bad. Okay, trust in the parts bin, and it will provide. So the handle situation is sorted. These both feel really good. Now we're going to turn our attention more towards some of these inside components. Let's get this frog out of here. Okay, a couple things to point out. For one thing, these frog screws here, these aren't tight enough. They're barely tight at all. If the frog isn't tight, it's going to move around on you. These need to be snug. So that could definitely be part of the problem with the plane not cutting well. Also, I'm going to say these screws need a bit better de-rusting. They're just, they're a little bit rustier than they need to be. I see one more little issue here. The way this frog is moving around. Yeah, okay. So there is a frog adjustment screw at the back of this thing. And it's right back here. And there's a tab on the back of the frog here, which has a fork, and it adjusts, it engages with this frog adjustment screw. And here, I'll take this screw out. So the frog adjustment screw has a little ridge in it, and the frog slides into this ridge. It's really important that it's captured there. In this case, the frog was actually sitting here so that it wasn't locked in, and that's also going to give us problems. These are minor things, but they all make a difference. Next, I would really like to get this lateral adjustment lever back on the frog, and the way the lateral is held in is kind of interesting. There's a rivet here. It's just made from mild steel, and it goes through the body of the frog. So the back of the rivet's back here, and then it pokes through there. Then the lateral adjustment lever just sits over that rivet, and then it's generally peened over a little bit. And what must have happened at some point is this lever got yanked off pretty hard, and it kind of pulled off the peening that was here and smoothed this out again. When I put the lateral lever on, I can still feel a bit of rivet sticking out. So I think I have enough, and I think it's reasonable for me to get this thing going again. So what I've got is a couple of ball peen hammers. I swear I made stuff for like a decade before I understood that ball peen hammers are actually for riveting. I was around these things my whole life. I never questioned it. So we might use the ball peen hammer, but the disc that actually moves the blade is really in the way. So I think the thing we're going to do is use this punch right here. It's almost the exact same size as the rivet. This is one of those operations where you'd rather have 3 hands. But I think if I hold that there and strike it, and I need the anvil for support. Okay. That actually feels great. I'm going to give it one more whack, though, because I haven't broken the frog yet, so why not keep trying? There we go again. Good. Okay, that tightened it up a bit, but I'd rather have it a little tight than have it fall off. And I have the world's cutest ball peen hammer right here, And I'm going to go in and see if I can peen that just a little. Now that lever is a little tight, but it's on there again, and I don't think it's going to come off. Nice. Now, other than the lateral adjuster, Will's frog is actually in fantastic condition. The rust has all been removed, the brass is shiny, the frog adjustment yoke is nice and clean. Great job, Will. Now we're going to flatten the face of the frog. Does this actually need to be done? Reasonable folks can disagree. I've never once pulled a Stanley plane out of a flea market or yard sale and seen that the frog had been flattened. It always has milling marks from the factory. Apparently the old timers never did this, but we started doing it for some reason. It's not hurting anything, but I don't go too crazy. I have some sandpaper here along the edges of my table saw. I've got 220 and 100 grit, and I took out the screw that holds in the lever cap right here, and that allows me to get most of the face. Do a little on the 100 grit. Just takes off a little oxidation and shows us what's going on. The surface is mostly flat and clean with some light milling marks still from the factory. And one issue here is there's the little nib that attaches to the controls and moves the blade up and down, and that nib gets in the way of you doing the whole frog all at the same time. The solution to that is to sort of do one surface, then do an edge, then do another edge. Honestly, it works just fine. The 100 grit has things pretty flat. Now I'm going to go over here to this 220 and work that a little bit. So that's the main part. Now I'll do one edge. And now I'll do the other edge. And there we go. That's a pretty flat, clean frog. That's all I ever do. Now we need to start looking at the blade and the chip breaker. And the blade on this plane is really super bent, and I can see what happened. If you imagine the plane assembled like this, something hit the iron really hard from underneath, and that accounts for the bend in the iron, and the lateral popped off. Getting hit from behind would do that. So don't hit your planes and don't drop them. I could put this iron in the vise and whack it with a hammer a few times, but it's never going to be like super flat again. So instead of getting heroic with that, we're going to go to this broken Miller's Falls plane because it's got an iron that should be perfectly compatible with the Stanley, and it's in good condition, and that plane's never going to work again anyway. So Merry Christmas, Will. You're getting a new iron courtesy of the Miller's Falls Corporation and my complete inability to walk away from a $1 plane. So now we're going to go over to the bench grinder. We're going to use the wire wheel to de-rust all the screws and washers. I'm going to grind a new bevel on this iron at 25 degrees, and then we're going to turn our attention to the chip breaker. The chip breaker is in great shape and it's been beautifully de-rusted, so that's perfect, but the fit between the chip breaker and the iron is not good. This is tough to see on camera, but there needs to be a very, very tight fit between the iron and the chip breaker. This one has some visible gaps in it, and that means shavings are going to get in between these two and clog the plane. Now, it's obvious that somebody, maybe Will, maybe not, worked on this chip breaker a little bit before, and they ground a bit of an edge here, which is great, probably cleaned up some raggedness, but it's not at a good angle. It looks like the chip breaker was kind of ground like this. What you need is a knife edge that meets the back of the iron, and the way to do that is to put the chip breaker on your lapping surface, sandpaper on cast iron in this case, and get it below like this, and then start to work it back and forth. And by holding the chip breaker at that low low angle and moving it back and forth on your lapping surface, you're going to get a nice knife edge that'll mate properly with the iron. I'm going to do this right now, but honestly, it gets a little dull if you don't need to know how, so we'll skip ahead a little bit. And this is where the whole project sort of went off the rails. So you remember that tote that I pulled off the Canadian Jack plane? Looked great. Completely the wrong shape, leaned forward a little bit too much. So every time I tried to grab the plane, my knuckles would hit the adjuster. So that tote wasn't going to work. I didn't have any more unbroken totes. So I went back to the Miller's Fall plane, took the tote off the back that was snapped right in half, glued it up, scraped it, then it was too pale, so then I stained it and clear coated it, and then, okay, Now we have a working tote. Then I went to sharpen up the iron out of that Miller's Falls plane to find that it was, what's the word I want to use? Butter soft. It was an absolute piece of garbage that wouldn't hold an edge no matter what I did. Must not have been heat treated correctly, so I needed another iron. So spare parts were getting thin on the ground at this point, so I went into the depths of my collection and pulled out this absolute roach. My father found this one for me at a yard sale and shipped it to me. Thanks, Dad. And it is by far the worst plane in my collection, the ugliest braze repair I have ever seen, an unlovable, unfixable tool. But I pulled out the iron and I scraped all the rust off of the name, and what do you know? It's a William Marples and Son. In case you don't know, William Marples was a legendary British toolmaker. They still exist to this day, but in the hand tool era, they were a big deal. And towards the end of the hand plane era, they even made some Stanley Bailey copies. So apparently, this piece of garbage started out its life as a Marples plane. And the iron that came out of it, a work of art. Tiny bit thicker than a Stanley, beautifully made, glass hard steel. Just takes an edge like you wouldn't believe. But it was rusty and a little bit pitted. I had to grind a bunch of it away, re-bevel it, hone it, flatten the back, polish it, made it up with the chip breaker, and then when all of that was over with, I still had to reassemble the plane, adjust everything, lubricate everything, and here's where we finally are. And I know you're thinking, well, that looks great, you did a good job. I bet now we're done. If only. At some point in its life, this plane got really, really rusty. And Will did a great job in de-rusting it. In fact, I think he sandblasted it, which is a great choice when you have a tool with severe rust. Unfortunately, this plane was so rusted that the metal body started to flake away in spots. Right here in the front, you can see some of the metal's actually gone. Now, on the sides of the plane, that's no problem, but the sole of the plane, you know, it's got to be flat-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this is kind of like the surface of the moon a little bit, and this is going to need some attention before this plane is going to work well. Unfortunately, there's no short solution to this. You have to lap it. So I'm here at my table saw, and I've got 100 grit and 220 grit. You just need something in that neighborhood. And you have to do it with the plane fully assembled because the body needs the pressure of all the other components to force it into the right shape. And then you just have to put it on the paper with the iron retracted so you don't sand the edge of the iron and work it back and forth. So we're going to take a couple of strokes here. Sometimes I would color it in black, but for this one it's not going to be necessary. Let's see what we get. Okay, that took off a lot of black oxide and stuff, and here you can see what we're working with. The sole of the plane, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. We have big, low spots here in the toe and some in the heel. I think it's savable, but this thing needs a ton of aggressive lapping. I expect I'll have to change the paper at some point. I'm going to be here for a minute, so why don't you guys go get a cup of coffee and meet me back at the bench. This might come as something of a surprise, but your plane sole does not have to be perfectly flat. You can see this one actually has a pretty significant flaw here at the toe, and I just lapped this thing for literally a half hour straight. We're going to call that cardio for the day. I'm done. I can't lap this anymore, and this flaw here is going to have to stay. The good news is, you can have some flaws if they're not in any critical areas. This low spot here in the toe isn't in front of the mouth. That might be a deal breaker because the front of the mouth presses on the wood and prevents tear out. It's very important. Behind the mouth is important too, and of course, the whole back part needs to be pretty flat too. Sometimes they're hollow here in the middle, and that's fine. I still have some chipping and issues here at the side. Oh, and I can tell this edge needs to be filed a little bit. It's a little rougher than we'd like. So it still probably needs a little work, but I've definitely lapped it well enough to test, and we're definitely up to the fine-tuning part. And I want to do all of that live on camera because it's more fun that way. While I set up to test this, let me tell you about an organization I just learned about. They're called Plain Wellness. They're a not-for-profit, and they're helping people overcome disabilities and mental health challenges through woodwork because woodwork is fun and relaxing. Woodwork is usually fun and relaxing. Plain Wellness is run by my new friend Jamie, who I just talked to on the phone for like an hour the other day. Very smart, knowledgeable guy on a mission to help people with mental health challenges and disabilities. Plain Wellness gives online free courses to people with diagnosed disabilities and to disabled veterans of our armed forces. They're obviously a great and very valuable organization. We're going to try and help out. Compass Rose, my tool company, is going to sponsor Plain Wellness and send them some free tools that they can use in some of their classes. If you'd like to check out what they do, we'll put their website here on screen, and we'll put all of their details down in the description so you can check that out and read about it. Let's see if this plane, works. And what I always want to do is put the plane on the wood with no iron, and then I'm going to advance the iron very slowly. So, okay, nothing, no iron, and now I'm going to advance the iron slowly as I push forward until, and that is a very good sign right there. That's a really nice shaving. Couldn't be any lighter. I think that passes the feathery shaving test. Let's see. Yep, that's good. Let's deepen that cut a tiny bit. Yep. Woo! I'm way more used to using a jack plane, which is longer. That's a nice shaving. I mean, this is the first time I've used this tool at all, and that is a full-length, full-width, nearly translucent shaving. That's pretty much exactly what we're looking for. Any idiot can edge plane something. If you're ever at a woodworking show and someone wants you to test their plane by edge planing it, that's all very nice, but you need to face plane stuff because that's where you really see the performance. Here's just a piece of construction lumber that I had sitting around, and it's got some knots and imperfections in it, so it's actually a good test. Let's see how this plane performs. Okay, not bad. Good, good. So I see some light scratches in the wood, which tells me the sole needs a little bit more work, probably around the edges. Probably needs some of that filing. Ooh, that was a knot that I mentioned earlier. But the shavings are good quality, and I think here you're going to be able to see that the surface is good. It's not perfect. It's got a couple of scratches in it, so I'm going to go around the edges of the plane with a file and some fine sandpaper. Oh, I feel the rough spots right here. So there's a few little things to work on, but the chip breaker is obviously working. The plane takes a nice shaving. The sole is flat enough, except for a few details. This tool is done. This is not Will's plane. This is my very first ever hand plane. And what's interesting about this is I got it in rusty condition and it had to be restored. And this first restoration took me a year. It was 2008, 2010, somewhere around there. And there was early YouTube. There weren't a lot of videos. There weren't a ton of books. There just wasn't a lot of information about this stuff. And fixing this plane up was such a struggle. I would work on it for a little while, get frustrated, stick it in a drawer, leave it there for a few weeks, come back, work on it again. And I repeated that cycle of working on it and getting frustrated and putting it away for a year before I finally got it working. And then the first time that I put this on a piece of wood and the shaving came out and I heard the shh sound, it was magic. Sent chills down my spine. It really did. One of the biggest moments ever in my woodworking career. And you have to give yourself a break when you're doing tools like this. A plane is not like a saw or a chisel. A plane is a little machine, and it's got dozens and dozens of moving parts, and everything has to be pretty much working correctly. The plane has to be like 90% perfect for it to take a shaving at all. There's not a lot of wiggle room. And here's Will's plane, and I think Will did what all of us do. He found a roached out rust bucket tool, probably for cheap, and he gave it his best shot. And what else can you do? You do your best. And in this case, he needed a little help. I would have loved a little help if I had known somebody who knew about hand tools back when I first got started. But that person isn't always available. And that's why I have a course, actually, in plane restoration. We came out with it just last year. It's like 3 hours long, 8 chapters. It goes into so much more detail than I could ever do in a video like this. Our course covers everything from cleaning and de-rusting to lubrication, sharpening, fitting the chip breaker, refinishing the handles, and the final fine-tuning and troubleshooting. We even have an entire chapter just in learning how to use an electric bench grinder with a wire wheel, because I think that tool is really essential. And that course has already helped a lot of people restore planes and get woodworking. We'll put a link to it down in the description. Big thanks to Will for loaning me his plane. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pack it up and send it back to you. And good luck with this thing, really. Patreon.com/Rex Krueger. My patrons get everything early and lots of things free or deeply discounted. It's an amazing community that you can belong to for just $5 a month. And we'll be back next week with more woodworking and vintage tools. Thanks so much for watching.